We're going to move right into our next panel, which is Eyes on a Higher Prize, Driving Impact at Scale. As you all know, impact in education is driven not only by traditional for-profit startups, but also, of course, by impact-first organizations. So in this panel, GSV's Head of Impact, Tiffany Taylor, will explore the work Indian organizations are doing in education. The panelists are leaders of organizations that reach tens of millions of students collectively. Please welcome our panelists and our moderator, Tiffany Taylor, Partner, Chief People and Impact Officer at GSV Ventures, Jigyasa Labroo, Founder and CEO Slam Out Loud, Utsav Kheria, Co-Founder Rocket Learning, Sonali Khan, Managing Director Sesame Workshop for India, and Gouri Gupta, Director of Central Square Foundation.
Thank you. All right, thanks so much, Anita. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Again, my name is Tiffany Taylor, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief People and Impact Officer at GSV Ventures. And I am thrilled to be in community with these dynamic leaders and excited about our conversation to explore what it means to drive impact at scale. I'd love for us to first start by just hearing one word that you use to describe the current state of education in India, and then one or two sentences that really describes how your organization is driving towards impact at scale. And Sonali, I'd love to start with you.
I want to say what describes education in India is to pass an examination. That's what education is about. Yeah. I would really want education to get us ready for life. Yeah. Yes. When we talk about what should education do, the ecosystem of education, it should reach the child where the child is, which means at home and in school. So that's how education should work. And therefore, who are the teachers, which means all the caregivers.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. Utsav?
I think in one word, if I were to describe, I think education in India is evolving. It's a work in progress, getting better.
Yeah. And how are you driving impact at Rocket Learning?
Sure. We work on the education of low-income children at their early formative years by partnering with governments and helping these children form a really strong foundation for preparing them for life and preparing them for jobs and examinations in the future.
I love that. Jigyasa?
Yes. So if I had to describe the current state of education in India in one word, the word would be inequitable.
Okay.
It might not be the most hopeful word, but I think it is the most authentic at this moment. For the work we do at Slam Out Loud, we come from a belief that our children, no matter where they come from, should have safe spaces for creative expression.
Yes.
And we do that by transforming how art education happens in Indian government schools. We place fellows who are artists directly in classrooms to work with children, and we increase the capacity of state governments to be able to bring holistic arts-based learning into classrooms that enables children to build socio-emotional learning skills that they need to thrive.
I love that. And Gouri?
Great. I think for me, education in India is inconsistent. So we have these islands of excellence, but unable to replicate it across the scale of India. I think just to describe the work that the Central Square Foundation is doing, we are a philanthropy, 10 years old, working in school education in India. Our priorities are foundational learning and Edtech. And what we attempt to do is to help children achieve foundational literacy and numeracy by galvanizing and supporting organizations that have expertise in technology, pedagogy, evaluation, governance. And these coalitions work with state governments across the country to help children learn better, both in school as well as at home.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so one of the things that I've learned by leading this work is that for education organizations that both have clarity around what their role is in the ecosystem and also the impact that they're driving towards, now they're wrestling with what does it mean for them to measure impact that simply moves beyond outputs. Utsav, can you talk to us about what that means for you at Rocket Learning?
Sure. Measuring impact is honestly a tricky phrase and very abused phrase at times.
Yes.
Ultimately, all of us, irrespective of the non-profit, for-profit space, I think at the end of the day, all of us are here, to create impact at scale, to ensure that children are learning more. So one, of course, is, just measuring how children are learning, their learning outcomes. But I think there are also intermediary steps before that, right? So for example, today, if you look at India's education budget, there's a lot of money which is spent on what kind of material is provided in the classroom. A lot of it is spent on teacher salaries, but really very little is spent on upskilling the teachers or training the teachers. For me, that is a very important metric to measure, intermediary. One very important metric to measure is just how parents are even thinking of education over time. So behavioral change is very critical. And I think ultimately, of course, that leads to learning outcomes for children.
Appreciate that. Jigyasa, how is it similar or different for you at Slam Out Loud?
Absolutely. I think we've all heard the adage, what matters gets measured.
Yes.
And often in the Indian context, we are in loops of measuring only things like foundational literacy, numeracy. We measure how children are doing academically. And at Slam Out Loud, our stake is in measuring how children are growing across more holistic outcomes, and by which I mean social-emotional learning outcomes. At Slam Out Loud, we define it as creative confidence, and we measure how children are growing across skills like communication, critical thinking, empathy, self-esteem. And I think one of the things that we've been able to crack has been how might we use the power of technology to shorten our learning and feedback loops in monitoring and evaluation. Especially in education, our cycles sometimes can be really, really long, in which it almost takes a year sometimes to get feedback, to really know whether our programs are working or not. And we can use the power of even mediums like WhatsApp and using that to engage children in surveys, engage teachers to understand how we're doing month on month in programs, and really being mindful that while there's so much research that artistic learning can lead to better academic performance, social-emotional learning skills are not in service of the academics. They stand on their own.
I love that. And Sonali and Gouri, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you know when a quality product is robust and ready for scale?
So Sesame now is, those who know Sesame and a lot of Americans in the room, there's 50 years of maybe 3 generations of American children who have grown up, and I've had adults come into Sesame office and saying, "Can we sing the Sesame song?" And and really, it's really amazing. It's one of the most researched work in the world. Children's work is most research is. And why we call ourselves the workshop is because we are always researching and reinventing and redeveloping ourselves. That's where the quality comes from, yeah? And I think what you raise the word quality, I think that's the differentiator. We've been talking about it the whole morning. How do you really provide quality content irrespective of socioeconomic categories?
Yes.
Sometimes in a country like India, when people are poor, we give them poor quality. And I have made this my mission to talk about this on every platform that I speak. That is when we say democratization means democratization of quality.
Yes.
Every last child should get the same quality. It doesn't matter what fees you pay. Yeah. And as Sesame, that's what we believe in, right? That's what the entire experiment of Sesame was. That can we look at the inner city child to learn, and that's the mission that we bring to India. Now, you asked, how do we measure?
Yes.
So I want to ask this question, that who are we measuring for? Are we measuring for the parent who wants to know my child is really smart? Or are we measuring the child? Because in effect, a young child should have positive reaffirmation, and you need to build on the positive aspects of the child. And build on that. But the way we measure is to show gaps in the child's learning. So I want to challenge the very premise of what and how we measure, right? So in fact, that should inform. And if that's where we start the journey of measurement, and that's how we should take it through life. You know, we are also a country that generates the most number of engineers who are jobless. So let's also put that into the room, that just learning math is not preparing you for life. You know, where are all the skills? I know people who have got the degree but are not able to make the cut in a job interview because they don't have everything else that they need. So we need to start really early, and we need, and taking off from what Jigyasa just said, what are we measuring for? All the executive functions which India's education system doesn't teach. And I think in the morning, Michael was speaking about the 3 C's. If we do a check-in the education system of India, how much of the 3 C's are embedded in early education, middle, senior, even higher? I would really like to ask.
I love that. Gouri?
Yeah, I think the question around when is a product ready to scale, right, is a $1 million question, right? And I don't know what is the unit we use, but more than $1 million question. But I think there is, for example, we work a lot with governments, right? And one of the biggest struggles with government is how do I procure right? How do I know which product is actually leading to learning versus it just being engaging, right? And you know, frankly, you can't blame a bureaucrat for thinking of edtech as only hardware, because hardware can easily be measured, right? The quality of learning software cannot be. And hence what we need in edtech is standards that define what is quality in edtech, right? And there is a nuance to say that, look, a personalized adaptive learning solution will have very different quality standards, you know, as compared to a interactive audiovisual solution or a doubt resolution solution or, you know, a digital classroom solution. And hence that nuance has to be created in those standards. And it's very interesting, but in India, IIT Bombay has actually built out Edtech Tulna. Tulna means comparison in Sanskrit. And what Edtech Tulna is doing is it's trying to define what quality means. And it's helping governments procure right by helping them, you know, get the right quality. And in my mind, right, if a product has been designed right and can meet those quality benchmarks, that's a first step in its measurement for impact, right?
Can I build in?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, you know, Gouri made a lot of sense when she said, you know, about the quality of the product. I think, look, all of us work with governments, right? So we work with systems, and for us, you know, PMF or product market fit is obviously one key ingredient. I think for all of us, a product system fit is equally important, and how the government perceives it, you know, the tulna. So how the government perceives it, whether it builds political economy for them. So I think just outside of the PMF, how well it fits with the system, government system, is actually equally important.
I want to build on this. Would love to hear additional thoughts about what should the role of government be in driving impact at scale. Any additional reflections there?
Actually, I remember one senior bureaucrat once said that if the government decides to move, you can't catch up. And it's true. You know, it's really true, because we were working with the government at that time on a project they were running on adolescent youth, and they decided to launch the campaign, train the facilitators, and they have so many people at their beck and call, and they can move. So it's an interesting question for this room, is how do you engage them? How do you really, given the right can I say, the right program at the right level so that we can reach more. So at Sesame, I think in India, one of the biggest things that we are trying to do is partner with the government at the state level. So very excited to share that we have just signed up with the Meghalaya government, which is a state in the northeast, where we are going to do their entire early childhood development curriculum, content, right from 0 to 8. So that could be really transformative for the entire state, for the children, but also the system.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could have achieved this with a small project or, constantly with small CSR money.
Yeah.
But because it's a government partnership, you can just hit at scale. I remember during COVID, when when everybody was trying to really figure out how to get their stuff out and reach children where they were, what system would work or not work. And at that point of time, we were on television, the government was trying to get things, they were the fastest because they could just get deals, which we as private players couldn't get deals. So I think those, if they decide, and if we can be at the table, I think we can make a big difference.
Yeah. Jigyasa, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'd want to add is a lot of us, almost all of us who work in the social impact space, and for us when scale does not really mean profits, it means the number of children impacted. Going through the government is almost like something you have to do to get to scale. Establishing a parallel organization to the government is something that is just not possible. However, in this association with the government, what a lot of organizations need to ask themselves is whether we use the government as a mechanism to scale, or we actually find a middle path where everyone brings some value to the table, and it does not stay limited to being a transaction. Because transactions are only short-lived. They do not cause long-term, enduring, systemic change. And an example of that in Slam Out Loud's work is that often when we work with governments, we say that there's an art period that exists in India. And our ratio of art teachers to number of students is 1:1400, which means less than 20 hours of artistic learning for children who go to government schools. Now, when there's such a shortage, how might we help the government in enabling more social-emotional learning to happen in that art class that already exists through a policy, which is the new education policy, which talks about how important safe spaces for creative expression can be, and how can we find a middle ground where none of the parties feel that there's a transaction or anyone is using anybody. Everybody is collaborating towards something both of them deeply believe in.
Can I come in here? One of my favorite topics. So in my mind, I think, working with government means different things at different points in time, right? So there can be outside-in support that you provide to government, right? When you're almost trying to seed something within the government setup, right? And then there you are an outsider and you're almost engaging with them on a particular idea, right? Once that idea gets seeded, then the idea is to say that, look, let's try and see how this works effectively, right? And there the support is, again, outside in, but you're using the government machinery to demonstrate or, work on certain outcomes. And then there is the phase where it almost needs to be institutionalized within government and you take a back seat, right? And it's important. Person in the government is most critical, right? And there is no shying away from that. But I also think it's very important for us to even know what stage we are at, right? And hence, what is the extent and nature of support that we need to offer to government.
I love that. I love that. So each of you shared one word to describe the current state of education in India. And when you think about what you want to be true for the children of India, what's required not to simply have meaningful partnerships that create those pathways, Jigyasa, that you mentioned in your work with the government, but what's required to truly sustain, right, impact at scale in this current environment? Sonali, do you want to kick us off?
Sorry, the Sesame, what Sesame has been saying for the last 50 years still holds good. is put a smile on a child's face and make learning joyful. Because I don't think that's happening. In fact, why I said that we are such an exam-driven country is that's what children fear the most. And that's what scars children for life, right? So let's put the smile back. And in fact, children coming back after COVID, I remember this lady saying that, I really want to partner with Sesame because you're so much fun. So I said, well, we are in an EdTech summit and we are not talking about the fun of learning. And I think that we need to bring back. And how do we do that? And what's that play-based mechanism? And I think technology can enable it. Phygital can enable it, like everybody's talking phygital now, like in a physical space. How do you, it's not playing soccer or just running around, it's how do you play to learn.
Yes.
And I think that's the critical part that we need to sort of look at.
I love it. All right, Utsav?
Okay. I think that's a fantastic start to have children smiling.
Yeah.
But I think that there are 4 key stakeholders to make it sustainable, right? One is, of course, the government. 2 is sort of people working within the government in terms of teachers. 3 is parents. And I think all of these 3 need to be aligned in many ways. And I think that's where technology can play a big role. Technology can actually make it sustainable. 2 is just ensuring that there is, there's sufficient capacity building within each and every each of these stakeholders. Of course, the government, teachers, and parents, and to ensure that obviously there is sufficient budget. I think without any of these 3, so capacity building, budget, and leveraging technology to make sure every single stakeholder is aligned, that's the only way in my mind to make it sustainable.
Jigyasa, I want to come back to you because I know in our previous conversation, capacity building is something that you named time and time again is desperately needed. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that will look like in real time? What type of programmatic interventions are needed, of course, alongside capital, to make sure that we build capacity in our entrepreneurs, our leaders, and to Utsav's point, all the stakeholders that are making this work possible?
Absolutely. So I think a part of the capacity building is connected to systems change, right? We want to work in systems which already have government bureaucrats, which have teachers who have been in the system for long and will continue to stay there. And enabling them to be change makers in classrooms so that the impact can be systemic and long-term is high in the stank rank of the jobs to be done for us as an organization. I also think in all of this, when we're building capacity of everyone who's surrounding the child, it's all of these stakeholders, which is the government, the parent, the teacher, anyone the child interacts with, even in society. And the big question to answer is, how might we always keep the child at the center when this capacity building of everyone around the child is happening? How might we always think about what is the voice of the child? What is the voice of our users? A lot of people in the non-education, often for-profit spaces think about and pride themselves in the proximity to the user. How many entrepreneurs, how many government officials, how many parents can actually say that they've spent enough time in the classroom, enough time with their primary user, have listened to the user enough, have felt the problem that the child feels deeply enough, and placing the child at the center, hence, of all that we do. Will increase capacity of the system overall. And then when it comes to, let's say, entrepreneurs and, like you said, leaders in the education space, of course, like capital to take risks is important. For us, like funders like Lal Jamal, Rain Matter, Rohini Nilkani Philanthropies have been funders who've trusted us to make big bets, fail and learn. And we need that kind of capital in the system. We need the kind of support of accelerators, incubators in the system that will allow education entrepreneurs to go out there, make mistakes, learn, and then come back better.
I love it. Gouri?
No, I guess it's all been covered. I think I'll just pick on the keywords. I think building system capacity, building capacity of parents, creating the budgets, and ensuring that along the line everyone buys into the program.
I love that.
I think those would be but no commentary because it's all been covered.
Yeah. So for Impact at Scale, we know that many organizations employ a digital-first approach, but we know that the digital divide limits access for many of our students. Given what you and leaders like you are working towards, what are some of the first steps that we need to take to decrease those limits and ultimately eliminate them? And Sonali, do you want to start?
That's interesting because, at Sesame, we always believed that we should reach children with what they are watching.
Yes.
So it was always the television, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly we found that the TV was taking a back seat and everything was moving to YouTube. And in the Sesame universe, I think India was one of the first countries that we did a YouTube pivot. In 2020, we just crossed 1 million subscribers on our Hindi channel. So we can just say that was for us a very big move to your point, democratize how quality content can be accessed. It's on demand, and we are just seeing a huge amount of ours that are being clocked on our YouTube channel. And now we have to answer the question, is it having impact? Yeah. So, we have to figure that journey out, while we can see all of the, average view duration and all the cool Google analytics. Right. But to your point, when you're talking about the digital divide, we have to we don't create infrastructure. Yeah. We don't build infrastructure, but we know that India is seeing the maximum video streaming globally. Yeah? And when we see traffic on our YouTube channel, it's coming from B and C towns. It's not coming from the metros. So interestingly, our traffic is not from Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore. It's from Patna, Indore, Ludhiana. So it's coming from all the B. So where's the appetite for this content? Yeah. And interestingly, in the top 5, we have Lahore, Karachi, which means by being on YouTube, we are cutting across geographical boundaries. Yes. We are talking about linguistic reach. Yeah. So it's really fascinating with how YouTube has helped us break down all of those barriers. And of course, we've been pushing content through WhatsApp and other media, which is available. But I think as of now, YouTube is probably the biggest and that way in which we can reach. Yeah. But yes, the last mile is really difficult because there is limited possibility. But for Sesame, we are also in classrooms. So we don't only have a digital presence, and wherever possible, we are giving out, pen drives. We are giving out different mechanisms where we can reach, but it's not easy. And for this, I do want to say it's the responsibility of the government. It cannot be just these people in this room. The government has to help both bring down cost of hardware, also bandwidth. Increase bandwidth and the cost of bandwidth.
I love it.
Can I?
Gouri?
So, I guess a lot of our work is with children from low-income households, right? And we've also figured that technology in the classroom in India is limited. Right, so there is something called the ICT at School scheme, which in some ways governs how ICT investment in the government school system is made, right? And that is restrictive. It does not allow, for example, technology deployment in lower grades 1 to 5. Mm-hmm. Technology deployment can only happen grades 6 onwards. Okay. But we do find that at a household level, right, device access in the form of smartphones has been increasing rapidly in India, right? And we're recently in the process of doing this Bharat survey for EdTech, which is trying to figure out what access engagement with EdTech looks in low-income households in India. And it's amazing, across rural, urban, device access is almost at 85%. which means that every household has access to it. I mean, 85% of India's households have access to a device. Now, whether a child has limited access or unlimited access is obviously the inequity that we're talking about. But even a survey done before COVID indicated that children were spending almost an hour to an hour 30 minutes on their parents' phones every day, engaging with YouTube, right, and playing games, etc. Which means that there is the capacity to engage with the child at home, which is, some of the amazing work that, Rocket Learn, etc. do. And we do find that we can find the child there, right? And access may not necessarily be an issue.
So I want to have us take a moment to just look into the future. So it's the year 2050. What is the headline that you want to read in the newspaper about your efforts at your organization? And I'll start with you, Jigyasa. That one headline, 2050, what does it read?
Times 100's list of the cultural curators in the world has 40 children from India who studied in a government school and were transformed by an art period that enabled them to build the skills to put their voice and art out into the world.
I love it. Utsav?
For me, the headline would be India's children ready to take on the world.
I love it. I love it. Sonali?
No child in India is excluded of preschool learning, thanks to Sesame.
Okay.
I guess India achieves universal foundational learning and becomes an exemplar for the world on system reform with parents, students, teachers coming together.
Okay. So we have about 4 minutes left. And as we close, I'd love for each of you to think about the leaders that are in this room that are influencing and shaping education in India. What's the call to action that you want these leaders to respond to ensure that we make good on the promises that you all have made to students in India? And Gouri, I'll start with you and we'll work our way back.
Yeah, so given we have, all the technology leaders in this room, I think technology has the power to democratize the quality of education. And children from low-income backgrounds need it the most. So I would encourage all of us to think of those children when we are shaping and building our products, and at least carve a small part in your product journey for those children.
I just want to say that it's not about the product, it's about the child. Saying that, I think we need to design child-friendly and make them ready for the future. So that's my ask. And just because I think 8th March is around the corner, I do want to bring back that how can we make sure that no girl is left behind as well.
Thanks, Sonali and Gouri. We live in a country where everything is divided into the buckets of the haves and the have-nots. But something as fundamental as finding our voice should not be restricted to only some classes. And there are so many of us who are education entrepreneurs in the room. What are we doing for creating spaces for the child's voice in whatever we design for the child? How are we keeping a child at the center? How might we spend more and more time with our user, which is the child, and understand their needs, their wants, and create something that will put them on a better life path every single time they use what we create?
Yes, I love that.
Thank you. My call to action would be fairly similar. The problem is really large. Yeah. The challenge of low quality education today in our country is extremely large, and I think it's important for as many of us to join hands, to share more. Yeah. And we need, honestly, the best people to work on the largest problems. Yes. And I would just urge everyone to, similar to I think what one of the panelists were saying here is, I would urge everyone to go on ground, to meet parents a lot more. I think that the digital divide will always be there, but I think keeping that in mind, we need to build for that divide, build for those behaviors. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making time to be in community together. Thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared. And most importantly, thanks so much for what you are doing and what you will continue to do for the children of India. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thanks so much, Tiffany and panel. I love that headline which said, all of India's children ready to take on the world. Thank you for a great discussion.